Thanks, Joe. Everyone can hear me just fine, I assume.
Yep.
So yeah, this was kind of a long time coming. The chapter purchased the drone, and at that time I did not know how to use it at all. So I've really come a long way in terms of operating it and creating a workflow. And I mean, it's been a tremendous tool for conservation so far in Western New York. So we're going to mainly be focusing on Wiscoy Creek. There's a few other graphics from other rivers that I've surveyed this winter. And yeah, one important thing to note is that none of this could be possible without you guys. So I just want to say thank you again. This is really cutting edge intel that we're collecting. It's novel information that we use for planning, and it's just a fantastic tool. So we're going to start talking about general thermal features we find in rivers. So that'll be a fun conversation, and then I'll go through the technical breakdown, and then I'll go through multiple slides of mapping of photos, and then we'll get into the Wiscoy Creek case study. And for this presentation, I'm really going to let the pictures do a lot of the talking. And if anyone wants to move up and move closer to see the screen a little better, feel free to move on up. So drones have multiple uses that we've been finding out we can utilize. We primarily have been using them to capture both color imagery and thermal imagery in the air. Here you can see this is the Pike Fairgrounds where the dam removal project was. That's the flow of the current going from up to down there. And you can see that there are no springs, and we'll get into identifying various characteristics of springs in a second here. And with this imagery, we can really confirm a lot of anecdotal reports of groundwater we've gotten from landowners, chapter members. Everybody knows the spring that's around the bend, but we don't know how big it is, where it truly is located, and if it really provides any refuge for fish. So as I mentioned before, it's a great tool for monitoring. Before we even really get feet on the ground in a lot of spots, we can fly it in the air, and then we can do a lot of planning, especially with Scott in the audience here. We use it for all of our fisheries planning and areas that we're looking at restoration projects in the future. To note, not everybody can fly a drone of this caliber. This one, it requires a commercial pilot's license, and that's because I'm flying it on behalf of Trout Unlimited National. So I had to go through the fun process of getting my commercial pilot's license just to fly a piece of plastic in the air. But it was very worth it. Had to take my test in Rochester, and it was a pretty arduous process, but I'm glad I was able to obtain that. So with thermal refuge, it's a term it's thrown around a lot. It's kind of an outdated term because of the multiple types of cold water that we find in systems now. The more widely utilized term now is cold water patch, or CWP. So in this presentation, you'll see me referencing CWP for cold water patches that we have not identified as habitat for fish yet. Now, once we identify that fish are actually utilizing these cold water patches, then we can classify it as thermal refuge, because fish are taking refuge in it during thermally stressful times of year. Now, there are many reasons that fish could be using these cold water patches, or they may be avoiding them, because predators are also very keyed in all these systems, and they can take advantage of these cold water patches and hunt fish in them if they are taking refuge. Us as anglers fall into that category as well. However, we've been finding, especially through my flights, that a lot of these cold water patches are not prime fishing areas. It's more of the cumulative impact of all of these smaller springs entering the system as a whole that's really promoting cool water throughout the system and not hot spotting like one spring hole where all the fish sit. So getting that out there that it's pretty ethical to do what we're doing. And with cold water patches, we've been finding that they really vary a lot, depending on stream velocity and how far out in the channel they can push. So imagine like a cushion of air, now it being a cushion of water extending out into the water. That's a very small area where the water is affected and colder. And this summer, we'll be doing a small amount of surveys on some of these cold water patches to actually determine whether or not fish do reside in them in the warmer months. So we'll be electrofishing these cold water patches. Now, with drone imagery as a whole, it's really useful for finding patterns of groundwater upwell. We have other thermometers, temperature loggers, that are really great at recording the time scale of temperature. However, if you place them upstream or downstream of one of these patches, you could have a much different overall temperature readout result for the year. So it's really great to use both the temperature loggers and the drone in conjunction to find your greatest areas to place these loggers to get accurate data. So drones, this one here, this is the Mavic thermal drone, and it's quite sophisticated, and the main piece of technology here is the camera. So this drone has two cameras. There's one for color imagery, and then there's one for thermal imagery. And this flies up 300 feet into the air, and it flies along a predetermined flight path. I would say we would pass it around, but it's $14,000, so we're not gonna pass it around. I was thinking of bringing it out like Messenger Woods, having a perch on my shoulder, but I decided against that. So as I mentioned, they present both color imagery and then thermal. So here we can see distinct patterns of cold water patches within systems. And you can see here, this is on the Cohocton, another river that I've been flying. The bright yellow, that's indicative of your cold water patches, or you can also call them spring upwellings. And you can see as it dissipates as it enters the main channel of the river. So a lot of areas that we previously known we've caught trout in, we've caught specifically brook trout in. You catch the fish in this whole patch. However, only the small area is actually thermally buffered. So that let me scratch my head for a little bit, trying to find out, do fish really utilize these patches? So after I do the flights, I visualize the data and I stitch it together using a software that attaches all of the RFI files together, and it's able to create like a unified map, as you see here. In the wintertime, which is the primary time I like to fly the drone, we find our spring upwelling patches are bright yellow and white. And then it's flipped in the summertime. You'll have your cold water patches being dark purple and blue. So it's a little easier in the winter to identify these cold water patches because you get more of a contrast with the snow, and then the snow is always cold and dark, so you get this nice purple. And then if you have a small spring entering, you can see a nice bright spring influence patch.
Is it true to have a ring there, where the cold water's on it?
So this is actually not even a tributary. This is the result of an old well barn that's pictured right about here, and it's comes out of the ground, very high volume spring, and enters the main stem of the Cohocton there. I actually just walked that today with the Region 8 fisheries biologist Pete Osterman, and he said he's been sampling this section of river for years and never knew that existed until I brought it up with him. So we were able to walk it today, and we did see brook trout shooting around. So This is another example of where we're going to actually go in and electrofish to see if fish are inhabiting it in the summer.
That's the
So-
optimism?
Yes, the Cavocton.
Kyle, this is a winter photograph,
This is the winter, yep.
so is the yellow relatively warm in its winter time?
Yes, so
Okay, it's because it reflects groundwater, right?
yes, so like the warmest patches are going to be your yellows and whites that you'll be seeing, and the main river will be like a darker orange.
When you say you stitch those, what are you thinking? Is that software doing it, or are you doing it manually? I mean,
So before we had the software, I would actually have to stitch each thermal image together manually, which took hours.
yeah.
And at the end of the day, if you mismatched one of these photos, you wouldn't get a full clear picture. So with the software that I use, it actually stitches them all together. It takes about 2 hours to process all the imagery. So when I fly the drone, I'm moving at 300 feet altitude and moving 10 miles an hour. So it's moving while taking photos. So you can see each one of the blue dots, that's a location where a photo was taken. And it takes a color image and a thermal image simultaneously.
How big is that stretch that you're showing? How long is that?
So that right there is approximately like a half mile. And one of my restrictions is I need to be able to see the drone during the entire course of the flight. Or if I cannot see it, I need to have, it's called a remote pilot observer, that I can station along the path with a walkie-talkie to confirm that we are maintaining eye contact with the drone at all times. And the final product, so this mapped layer, it's considered an orthomosaic. It's just a fancy term for stitched together imagery. Now, primarily what we've been finding and what other studies have found in the West are that there are 2 different kinds of cold water patches. There's one that comes from a tributary, so you have tributary influence. This is considered continuous. And it's continuous because it enters the stream and you can see the thermal cushion extends downstream quite a ways. So this area here provides quite a bit of potential refuge habitat for fish that could utilize it. The other type of cold water patch is discrete. So it's like a very small single spring that's entering from the margin of the river. And because of its size, it kind of gets like reduced by the current, so you don't see the full thermal cushion that a smaller discrete patch.
It looks like the one on the left is zoomed in versus the other one being farther away.
Oh yes, so these are just 2 examples just to show the 2 different kinds. The other thing is with discrete patches, you can have multiple discrete patches that would ultimately result in the same overall impact as a large continuous spring. So there can be 2 different scenarios going on in a given system.
It doesn't have to be a trail, it can be in the stream bottom too, right? You can find things like that.
Yeah, so 2 things that I've been finding when flying the Western New York area is that there's a lot of like groundwater upwellings that are adjacent to the stream, comes out in a small wetland, and then it looks like a finger, and then it enters the main stem. And then there were only a few occurrences where we found like a mid-channel spring where I was expecting a lot of these holes to be full of springs, and what we are finding is that's not the case.
Are you seeing any correlation between the grade of the stream and the street patches? Are they just random, one slower, faster?
So far, we have not found a real pattern with it at all. We found very high gradient streams with continuous patches and discrete patches, and then very low gradient streams like the upper sections of Wiscoy that had continuous and discrete as well. So it's depending on the groundwater hydrology and if there's any impingement that's forcing groundwater up at a given point. It varies drastically across the state, I've been finding.
Are you, even compared to the water moving slower, is there, greater fish population there, even though the water's moving slower, the temperature is, more optimal for them, or if it's moving slower?
So it depends on the time of year you're looking at it. So if you have like a slow area, like right here, you have your discrete patch, but because cold water sinks, there's more of this underwater that we're not seeing. But because it is, like I said, depending on velocity, your cushion can like shrink or get bigger depending on flows. Does that answer? So now we kind of get into the Wiscoy Creek study itself. So I flew multiple locations on the watershed, starting in Bliss. I had 2 flights in Bliss, and then I worked my way down to the town of Pike, took a detour, flew Trout Brook, and then I worked my way further down the watershed all the way to the Great Cabin area. So is everyone familiar with this portion of the watershed where the north branch of Wiscoy enters the main stem Wiscoy, which is actually frozen in this photo, and then it flows downstream easterly down past the town of Bliss. And
The
into Pike.
confluence is at that square there? Yeah, it's frozen.
Yep, this is the confluence. Sorry, losing my voice already. We're on slide 1 of Wiscoy. I was out in the field all day and it was 30-mile-an-hour winds, so I was yelling in the wind all day. So we can see here that with the software you have your like base map, and then this polygon of imagery, that's the most the newest ortho imagery that's created from the drone itself. So, like I said, we're going to start in patch 1 here, looking at the confluence itself. And when we zoom in, we can see the north branch enters the main stem Wiscoy, and the main stem is actually frozen. We were flying on an 11-degree day, and it was about 7 degrees right now in the morning. It's really important to fly the drone when it's cold, so you get the most contrast between your temperature patches. I also had temperature loggers deployed on a few of these sites that I'll be talking about, and the main stem was at 32 degrees, and then the north branch was 35 degrees. The north branch is a watershed that is very connected to the aquifer, and it maintains a very stable temperature. So 35 is a pretty normal temperature for north branch in the winter. Now what we can see here is there's very little warm water coming from the main stem at all. So that 32 degrees that we measured upstream is accurate. And we can see that there's thermal mixing within the north branch and main stem. So if you notice this color orange, and then you look at this deeper color orange/red, that when it mixes with the cold main stem water, you lose about a degree. And so the mix downstream is 34 degrees.
Is the purple actually like tree shadows, or what is that?
Yes, so those are tree shadows, and since we were flying early in the morning, they are blue, so they're still cold. You'll see as we move on that the trees start warming up because of their dark color and absorbing all the sunlight. So now we'll play a little game here. Guess where the groundwater is entering in this picture.
From the ground up.
Maybe over this way. So Joe knows this already. We walked this. But originally I was looking at this imagery and I thought, maybe right here might be some groundwater influence. Well, it turns out that there were 2 areas. There's one main channel seep right above the Angler parking lot here. And this is in an area with very little habitat. And then as we work our way down here, there's a pretty strong discrete patch right below the parking lot. So right where everybody walks through to enter the stream, you're stepping in spring every time. And from the times I've been here, which is more than I care to admit, I've never seen a fish nuzzled up into what is right here if you're walking out of that parking lot. So this is what that spring looks like, and that was walked on Friday. So, we can see like there's great habitat on this bank here. We have a spring, but it's on the leeward bank. So, unless you're a young deer or trout, or a small darter or a sculpin that can utilize this patch, it's truly not being used by fish.
It does contribute.
Exactly, so it contributes to the system as a whole. So as we move downstream, we get into the beaver ponds that's been brought up to me by the chapter. What are the impacts of these beaver ponds, and are they warming the water, or are there any negative benefits to trout that we've been seeing so far? In this study, it's part of a larger study that I have 14 beaver ponds across the state looking at the same impact of beavers on streams. Wiscoy was a great system because we do have a beaver pond that the chapter has a lot of interest in, and we were able to deploy the temperature loggers upstream and downstream of the ponded area. And then this past summer, we did a fish collection upstream and downstream of the pond as well. And then we also did an in-depth habitat survey of the stream, upstream and downstream. So just for some reference, we'll see in a second, we focus our temperature in our fish collections on like true normal stream conditions above and below the pond. So we weren't sampling the beaver pond itself. So with the temperature data, I was able to create a quick graph. It might be a little difficult to read here, but we have upstream in blue, and we have downstream in red. And then air is this faint white line that should have been blue. That is air temperature. So what this graph represents is temperature throughout the whole season. So earlier I mentioned we use temperature loggers, and we also use the drone for temperature. This temperature is from June all the way to December when I removed these. However, you can see that upstream and downstream, there's faint red dots along here that are almost overlapped by the blue. So that's indicating that the upstream and downstream temperature are very, very similar. On other beaver ponds that I reported temperature data on, there is a drastic difference between the red and the blue line, where here we can barely differentiate between the red and the blue line. So for the Wiscoy hillside beaver pond, we do not see an impact to temperature.
What's your theory on that?
My theory, we're going to get to that in a second, it's the groundwater impacts that the beaver ponds promote.
Useful beaver
Yeah, well, so with the beaver ponds, it's a pretty contentious topic when you talk about it, across the state. There's a lot of different opinions on the matter. However, each beaver pond is very site-specific in what we've been finding with the temperature impacts, the impacts to springs with the drone footage, and then habitat above and below and trout populations. So I like to focus on one beaver pond and don't clump it into the rest of beaver ponds that could be actually warming streams. So in this case, this is a tolerable pond.
How old, just out of curiosity, how old is that?
This dam has been there for approximately 5 years now. It's been rebuilt quite a few times. However, in the last year and a half or 2 years, they did have a trapper to see if there were any new activity. And this dam itself, the trapper indicated that there was not any new chews that they've been finding. However, being out in the field a lot, I'm still seeing a lot of indication of a beaver inhabiting this dam. So I still think that there's an active beaver in the area.
The reason I asked, I just wondered how much siltation has occurred since that dam was built.
Yes, so below this, there's about 50 yards of silted substrate on the bottom of the stream. However, we still collected a lot of trout right below the dam. So beaver ponds, they have an interesting role in the hydrology of streams, and this hasn't really been studied in the east much. So this is from papers out west that show the groundwater impacts of beaver ponds, and one of the impacts is hyporheic flow. So what hyporheic flow is that's blown up a little bit too large here. I don't know what happened there. Is the underground flow of groundwater. So because you can't compress water, beaver ponds, they create a head pressure in the stream. So you have all the weight of the water in the upper beaver pond pushing down, forcing groundwater down, and then also downstream in the watershed. So you basically get beaver dams that act as small cold water release dams. So here is an example of the beaver dam number 1 on Wiscoy. This is a set of one of 2 dams, and this is the upper dam. So we can see here with the relatively same color yellow and orange that we're finding, there are no real spring upwellings within this dam. However, when we move downstream, we see a different story. So this is dam number 2. I'm not sure why that is sliding there. Okay, so this is the downstream dam. I think when I added in that last graphic, it messed up the order of the slides there. So this is the downstream dam here, and the dam is right here, and then below the dam, you see this really white hot patch of yellow. That's direct evidence of all the weight of the water from both of the dams in the system pushing down on the groundwater, forcing it underground, and the beaver dam right here is the weakest point. So it needs to find a place to escape, so it upwells right at the base of the dam. And then we see down here is another potentially separate spring, however with beaver dams and with the hyporheic flow impacts on these dams, the groundwater that's being pushed out to here gets pushed downstream, and it actually amplifies other groundwater seepages that are in that same channel basically.
What do you mean by amplified?
So it increases the flow that goes through those smaller springs. Sorry, the slides were getting all messed up here. Okay, so here we can see this is the confluence of Trout Brook and main stem Wiscoy. So this is the main stem of Wiscoy flowing down here. This is Route 39, and this is the text pull-off before you get to Albro Road. We can see here that Trout Brook is actually colder than the main stem Wiscoy. And that was kind of a surprise to me, as we thought lower Trout Brook is also cold. It does not appear to be the case. We found a lot of ice on Trout Brook. And the main stem Wiscoy was actually warmer because of this spring tributary that enters here. So you can see that large thermal plume coming from that tributary, contributing to the Wiscoy's temperature as a whole here. So that's a great example of like a continuous patch that we talked about earlier. Okay, still not sure what's going on with the slides, but here's imagery of the entire of the area. Stand by for 1 second here. I'm not quite sure what's happening with the slideshow. Everything appears to be shifted down one slide, so all of the graphics are in the wrong place, essentially. Apologize for that. Let's try.
Sometimes it happens in a different resolution, you know?
Yeah, I tested this PowerPoint multiple times, and it seems like after that slide, it's all messed up. Okay, so we're gonna have to just wing this one here. So now we're on Trout Brook. And let's see, yeah, it doesn't reveal the accurate slide. So this is Hillside Road here. And you can see the three different branches of Trout Brook that flow into main stem Trout Brook. This is the main stem of Trout Brook. And these are considered two of the tributaries. Beforehand, before I did these flights, I was under the assumption that this tributary to the right here is very, very cold, and this one to the left was warmer than both of these two combined. I'm just going to flip back to this slide since it's still semi-accurate. We can see that the main stem of Trout Brook here, there's a very large continuous thermal patch here, and that there's a separate thermal finger here, and then on this right-hand tributary, you can see that there's multiple patches of warm water that are emerging on the right-hand tributary. So most likely, these two tributaries are hydrologically connected, and upstream of this tributary is all ice. On the left-hand tributary, we found it was generally cooler than these two. However, there is a very small, discrete patch of groundwater upwelling right before you get to the bridge. But this is a prime example of areas that could provide refuge, and we actually have data that we do find brook trout in this thermal plume. Okay, so this is further down on Trout Brook. You can see we have three large spring inputs here on the hillside that enter down, and if you kind of squint, you can see along this entire northeast bank, there's a brighter yellow line that follows it. So that's the thermal cushion from these two different spring inputs here. Okay, now it's going back to the original Trout Brook photo. Okay, and this is what those two or three spring fingers that enter lower down in Trout Brook look like from the air in the winter. So you can see this is about 15 degrees now air temperature. These patches were still open water. There are many other uses of the drone, and one of them is to actually generate 3D point cloud models. So here, this is an image of that same spring that we talked about in slide 1. You have that well house over here, the tributary entering the river, and then the tributary entering in 2 different spots into the main stem Cohocton. With this technology, we can actually model the elevation of trees, buildings, structures. We can look at the grade of the river and calculate slope from this. It's really a game changer in terms of doing projects on rivers. We can also generate, yeah, see the slides are all messed up. We can also generate these 3D point clouds, and we use them to look at previous projects. So this is the Gray Cabin project site. This is not an image. This is actually stitched together a 3D cloud that was made from all of the imageries in vertical orientation. So you can see some of the trees look like they're flat. That's because this image was rendered from the Google Map type 2D image.
What was that dash
So there was another slide showing an example of a culvert project with this. And what you can do with the software is you can actually measure, cut, and fill volumes from the imagery itself. So this is very helpful when doing culvert replacements. You can calculate the amount of road fill that would be needed. That's so bizarre. I'm not sure why those are popping up here. This should be a full-size image of this culvert here. So some lessons that we've learned is that these springs that we're finding in western New York, these cold water patches, they're primarily on the margins of the stream, and then they enter in from the sides. We only found one example of a mid-channel seep, and that was on the upper Wiscoy by the Bliss Old No-Kill site.
Why would they emerge on the margins?
Because as we've seen in here, so when you look at the underlying hydrology, it's easier for the groundwater to upwell from the hillside on the base of the valley, and then penetrate through the actual substrate of the stream bed. So this is just where it's easiest for groundwater to upwell.
So in the case of the Beaver Ponds, the water is being, the groundwater is being pushed down, it still is entering the market, but it's sinking, pushed down to the bottom, remaining there until it's pushed down.
Yes. Let's see if the slide will work here. So you can see there are multiple kinds of flow that can happen in a beaver pond. So for example, you have flow that goes through the dam, under the dam, and then also around the dam. However, this is because of the different elevation differences. So you will have groundwater up here that will enter the side of the stream below the dam. Hence why we're seeing a very large thermal plume right below, kind of on all sides of the creek.
It'd be interesting to see what happens during the summer, because some of these don't dry up, or, they can usually reverse them in cold waters.
Yeah, so it really depends on the height of the water table. If we have a warm, wet spring and into the summer, you may find very similar impacts of groundwater. However, yeah, if it is a drier year, these aquifers might not be reaching the surface, so it could be all mud here. So we also found that flow has a large impact on the actual size of these cold water plumes we're finding. and it's dependent on the flow regime of the stream as a whole. So if fish that want to utilize this flow, if it's too high in the winter, they're not going to make the effort to get to these cold water patches. However, in certain streams where it's easy to navigate within the stream, they're more likely to utilize cold water patches. And then one interesting thing that I found was that as you warm up during the course of the day, let's see here. See all of these bright white patches here, and those are trees. When I was originally processing this imagery, I thought we had lots of springs along the road here, and it turns out they were all trees. So it's really important to have the color imagery and then to layer it on top of the thermal. You'll also notice up here in the corner of this, there's quite a bit of inflection that happens on the edge of the maps, which basically gives the illusion of brighter temperatures, but that's just because of the angle of the camera getting close to the edges of the map. So everything that's kind of in the central portion of this map is very accurate. So what we're seeing here with this thermal plume is accurate.
And all that may change later in the day as the trees come up and stuff like that.
Yeah, so you really have to, pay attention to when you fly, and that's why it's so important to fly early in the morning in the cold months of winter. You really need a meticulous review of all of the imagery after you process it. So I probably sit down and look at all of this imagery for about 2 hours per site just to make sure I'm not missing anything.
What resolution of the photo? You're at 3 feet and 2 minutes.
Yes, so each photo file is, I believe, 2 megabyte. So yeah, especially with the radiometric thermal raster imagery, it's quite large file sizes, and many times my computer feels like it's going to melt. And it gets really warm, so I actually have to get a new computer soon. Okay, once again, this should be a different photo behind the thank you. It should have been a photo of us three. That's Scott, Tom, and I by the side of the truck. So you can see when you have trucks, the engine bay is much warmer than the rest of the truck, and you can actually see where vehicles drive in the snow. So I apologize for the imagery being all wonky with this, but I really want to thank Western New York for providing me the drone, and then also DEC with Scott to really be the boots on the ground for a lot of field support, and Lower Great Lakes Fish and Wildlife. They didn't make it tonight, they wanted to. Tom, Zach, and Peyton, they've been out there in the field with me doing these flights as well. So thank you to everybody for this.
So Kyle, when you're flying 300 feet and 10 miles an hour, and you're taking the pictures, you're not manually doing it. You program that phone, say every 100 feet or whatever.
Yes, so there's, avert your eyes for a second here. There's a predetermined flight path that I create that follows the channel of the stream. At every one of these points, it'll just take a photo automatically. I used to do it manually, and it took way too long. So yeah, now it's all pre-planned, and the pre-planning takes about 2 hours to make sure we have the right path, the right resolution, right altitude. There's another component of this that I don't have to deal with much because we fly in mostly rural airspaces, but we need to be Class G airspace, which means it's free to fly wherever. If I was to fly on a Wiscoy Creek near the city of Rochester by Rochester International Airport, I would need to actually sign and create flight waivers that I need to put in 2 months ahead of time with the FAA, and it works like a permit basically. That allows you temporary access to fly. One interesting thing with the different, airspace things is MOAs, or military operation areas. You can fly in those at your own discretion. So that was one question on the test that always tripped me up because I didn't think it could be true. But you need to fly your own discretion in those. But if you fly anywhere near an airport, you need flight waivers, and then you also need to clear it with air traffic control. So I haven't had to do that yet because of where we fly, and I don't anticipate having to do that. But it's another step in the process of flight planning. Any more questions about
What's
specific
next?
springs?
What's next?
What's next? So there are a lot of areas on Wiscoy that I wanted to fly, and we just ran out of time. I want to fly below Pike a lot more, but those rely on hikes in, so you're able to get a clear line of sight. There's a lot more tree cover, so. At this point, I'm really fighting tree cover and ground temperature, because this time of year, your air temperature, your ground temperature, and then your cold water patches are all really similar. So the camera has a really difficult time at picking up those patches this time of year. So winter and then summer, if there's not a lot of canopy, so I'll be out there.
Is it dependent on how high you fly, whether or not you get a clear image?
So I was given guidance to stay around 300 feet because that's best for the thermal imagery. If you wanted to fly lower, you get even crisper color imagery. Yeah, but for example, this color imagery, I can actually zoom in so far I can read logos on like a backpack or something that I'm wearing out in the field. It's quite impressive where you can read the brim of a hat from 300 feet. So this is the pretty cutting edge imagery that we generate from this.
Did you plan on doing any summit?
Good point that Joe brought up here. I am looking this summer for the citizen science initiative to go and ground proof a lot of these areas of thermal upwelling that we did find in these flights. So there'll be approximately 10 groundwater patches that I'll want people to go and measure with a thermometer. And I have thermometers that hand out and distribute, so I'll get with Joe and we get a date for that, maybe in July or August. So if anyone wants to come out there and ground proof a lot of these areas, it'll be really interesting to see.
One of the things I guess I'd point out for the what's next question, some of these areas Kyle's flying and some other ones he's talking about wanting to fly this year are the areas where last in 2023 we walked the stream and identified areas where there's lacking habitat or really bad stream banks or something. So those are areas that have kind of been prioritized for stream restoration work. But if Kyle goes and finds really good cold water patches at some of those, we would say that's a high priority to put some good habitat in there, because now you've combined cold water with something that the fish can get away from predators and survive. So that, that's kind of a great part of this, and I wish we had years ago to kind of guide where we work to really make the most out of those habitat projects, making sure the groundwater is really good there too. We just never had that ability.
Yeah, you do bring up a good point, Scott, and that's whether or not fish are reliant on these cold water patches or if they're reliant on habitat as a whole. So 90% of the year when fish are not thermally stressed in Wiscoy, they're relating to areas of the best habitat. So if you can layer on having a cold water string adjacent to that good habitat already, you really boost the overall value of that portion of the stream.
What is a predator? I don't mean to seem ignorant, but what would be a predator for a trout?
Oh, that's a good question.
Besides people, basically,
Yes.
you've got the traditional one is the great blue heron. We've got a lot of them. We got a lot more of them now. but things like mergansers, fish-eating ducks, you've got otters, you've got mink. Those are all things that can get in the water and go after the fish.
So they could potentially destroy the stream.
Well, they can certainly eat a lot.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
And the second question is, we're focusing on Wiscoy. What about the issue of things down in Franklin Creeks down there? Or is this just focused in this one area?
So if we have chapter interest in any other watersheds in Western New York, I want to fly as much as I can to utilize the software that I have. So whether it be, a few people come out on a weekend next winter and we fly the Wiscoy, I want to fly Oatka and Spring Creek in Caledonia. There's a lot of water to fly and a lot of good information to gather from that.
A lot of this was kind of focusing here because Wiscoy Creek is a priority watershed for trout unlimited right now. Also, being in the Great Lakes watershed as a whole, there's a lot more grant money out there for doing habitat. The Wiscoy Creek is in the Allegheny River watershed, and there's a lot less grant money out there to do work. So, we're kind of focusing some of these on priority watershed that's most likely to get grant funding to do work. But, there's dozens and dozens of streams that could use this.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk of doing flights on Cattaraugus as well. But as of right now, we're a little constricted to where we are funded. However, I will fly for fun. If there's a very interesting thermal feature that we want to record in ground proof, I'm more than willing to do that for the chapter.
Maybe we need a TU Air Force.
If we have 10 more Kyles and 10 more drones, we can do a lot more of the work.
Yeah, I can comfortably do about 4 flights a day, so 1 flight per battery. Each battery lasts about 40 minutes, but in the cold, each battery lasts about 20 minutes. So I had a few close calls with, timing out, on a cold day, battery usage and battery life, and then actual, how far you can actually fly. So luckily with the software, I can go in and modify the flight path based on current battery usage. So there should be no drones on the ground anytime soon.
The drone's smart enough to know when it's about to run out of juice, right?
Yes.
It
So
says, I'm going home.
At 50% battery, it will automatically go home, except if you experience a lost link connection. And this is kind of rare. However, I heard when you fly close to power lines in areas that have a lot of radio airwaves kind of interfering with the drone's RC controller, there are instances of it going off 30 miles an hour in random direction. And you have to find it and hopefully have enough battery. There is a tracker on the drone, so I have an app to find my drone. I haven't had to use it yet. It's a very, very unlikely situation. And in the case of it does go down and it is compromised, I have up to 4 replacements a year, total replacement of the drone and everything, with the care plan that I have for it.
How do you store the image data on the drone? Is it like a card or something much more sophisticated than that?
Yeah, I have a 500 megabyte SD card that I use for that. So I can do multiple flights on one card, and then I have to upload it to my computer just with the SD card.
Gotcha.
How many batteries did you get with that?
So it came with 1, and then I actually, with national funding, bought 3 more so we can get more capacity with flights. Any other questions? Do you want to look at any other areas? I can get out of the slideshow and zoom in on areas.
Where were all the fish congregating?
Well, we don't know, and quite honestly, a lot of these small thermal inputs, when I walk by them, they're not really holding fish. So, like I said, all of them together are contributing to the temperature as a whole.
Yeah, maybe Dan had it.
Right. Yeah, a lot of these springs are, there's not fish swimming up in them, but downstream of it, you could have better habitat and fish utilizing that because of the spring.
Is that just because winter?
So we don't know yet. We're going to be doing some bee fishing this summer to find out.
Did you thermal any beaver dam stuff on there? I think you did. You did? You did?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Let's see here. The best example that we have of the beaver dam.
And does this, the beaver dam stuff you thermaled, does that measure out throughout New York? I know you're doing a big study. Is that really similar to what you see all over?
Currently, no. So I think it depends on the volume input of these springs, the number of dams within the beaver dam complex, and the hydrology of the watershed as a whole. So, I'm not really finding a pattern right now in water temperature above or below ponds. So I have ponds in the Adirondacks, Catskills, Central New York, Southern Finger Lakes, Western New York. I think that's it. So,
Can you touch on it a little bit, like some of those other ones on the other end of things, how much temperature increase you were seeing?
yeah, so I wish I had some of this data I could pull up real quick, but for example, on some of the upper Susquehanna tributaries, the downstream of the beaver ponds is much colder than the upstream component, and then there are some within the same watershed that are equal, and then there's one that had all the fish in it, and the downstream was much warmer than the upstream. So right now it's kind of a toss-up, and I think it really depends on the hydrology of what's happening with the hyporheic flow, and if the substrate in the watershed can promote that hyporheic flow and let groundwater move underground more efficiently.
Preliminary, it's just random then.
It's pretty random at the moment.
Do you think those beavers know the influx of temperatures and? Real question. Yeah. Do you
Not
think?
a question I'm expecting from you. Let's see here. I feel like fish and beavers and wildlife as a whole are much more in tune to these thermal
Sure.
areas than we are.
That's why I'm asking. I figured you'd be the guy to know if there maybe is a correlation of their strategic placement of some of these.
I definitely think there is strategic placement of where the beavers put the dam. Because they have the most impingement and they can capture the most amount of water without too much water, so during a flood event their whole project doesn't get wiped away. So ultimately they're trying to reduce work for themselves by putting them in strategic places.
Are you familiar with this beaver dam? Overall fishing wise?
Yes. It holds a lot of big brown trout.
How new?
The last 3 years is really when I started fishing it more, because I originally started looking at it as a detriment to the stream, but then when I started catching 18-inch browns out of it, I thought otherwise. And we were finding catching browns throughout the entire pond complex. One thing to note with this pond in particular is the thermal regulation from the north branch of Wiscoy. We can see the overall temperature throughout the whole upper pond is pretty darn near uniform. Where that lower pond, just because of the upwelling, is where we see the hyporheic flow impact. But I've caught browns throughout the entire complex.
So based on that, do you think next year you'll continue to see it, or do you think you'll see a maximum there of size of fish where sedimentation and warmth will take over versus it being a 3-year-old dam where you still have gravel inflow and different things showing up? At a certain point, do you think beaver dams are turning trout streams junk?
Well, in the Adirondacks, we have some beaver dams that the foresters said were there for 30 years. Some of the ponds, there's 15 ponds, beaver ponds in the complex, and that, the overuse by beaver ultimately starts to warm up the water if you keep ponding it. So like this one only had 2 sub ponds, and they're relatively small sub ponds. We're seeing the result. But in the Adirondacks, we've seen significant warming, like 50 degrees coming into the pond, 85 degrees leaving the pond complex. With brook trout still being downstream of the pond at 85 degrees. So, obviously fish are still finding cold water patches.
You just to see when that dam breaks, what happens over.
Yeah, I was very interested in that because of this downstream spring. So right now we're seeing potentially an amplification of the groundwater upwelling here. However, if the dam breaks and returns to normal spring or normal stream conditions, this groundwater upwelling might not be as strong as we're seeing it right now. So that's something I want to see. If the beaver dam breaks. I'm content with this pond entering and leaving. The biggest concern of this pond is the beaver harvesting all of the trees in this whole floodplain and knocking out the riparian and reducing overall stream shading. That's the biggest risk of this pond.
Including the trees we've been planting in there in the last 15 years.
Yeah, they can get through tree tubes.
Luckily, most of them are still tubes, but yeah.
Any other questions? So not with the drone imagery, but currently there has been updates to the wetland regulations. So before, the state didn't have every small patch of wetland delineated and identified. Now the state has very small patches of wetlands that are now identified as critical wetland. So that as a whole is going to become a barrier for some projects in Wiscoy especially. But time will tell if we run into those small wetland patches.
Real quick, are you seeing? Go ahead. Are you seeing a lot of sedimentation issues relating to our local beaver dam scenarios? I know you hit a beaver dam every time you see one, you're fishing the heck out of it. Where I'm making a cast and going above it a lot of times. Some of them are lasting 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. Some of them are getting chewed out, but like this one, you said 3 years right here, give or take.
3 years when it was most active, but it's been in the system for probably around 5 years now. Yeah.
But is it fluctuating, or is the dam blowing out, and then is it getting rebuilt? Is it going up?
So the dam never fully blown out. However, during flood events, it was like lowered, but then the beaver rebuilt. So.
So do you think next year you'll go there and you'll see the same quality fish that you're catching this year?
Most likely. Scott, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think as long as right now the conditions stay the same, the habitat's pretty good downstream where that potentially cooler water is. We've got some nice undercut banks through there and some good habitat. So I think as long as that's there and the water's still coming out cooler. Kyle, did you want to talk a little bit about Trout Brook as far as what we found there?
Yeah.
There was a difference big difference in the fish populations there. What made me think about that was a question about sediment.
Yeah, so this is a perfect example of a case-by-case basis. Okay, well actually this works out. So what we can see here is this whole, you can see this whole parcel here is largely unvegetated by like trees. That's because there has been a beaver dam that would pop up sporadically here for the last 10 years. what we found temperature-wise with this pond, and then with the sedimentation, is that below this pond, it seems to be storing a lot more sedimentation that came from upstream from agriculture, and it would all settle into the pond. However, this pond did blow out in downstream of the pond for about 25 yards. It's highly sedimented, and to the point where I didn't even collect any macroinvertebrates in that section of stream. It was devoid of life. So an example of where sediment can be bad would be below the beaver pond on Trout Brook.
And we saw that in the trout population. In the pond itself, we had a lot of trout. And the stretch below the pond, we had almost none. There was a big difference in the trout population above the water.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see how that develops for this upcoming year of sampling there, because this past winter I did notice significantly less sedimentation in that section walking it. A lot of it flushed out with high water events. It'll be interesting to see what we find for trout populations there.
Is there a pH imbalance at all below those?
Not that I've been finding. No.
Well, speaking of invertebrates, you double trees in there, but I was wondering if you had a chance to highlight the statistics from the chloride study.
The chloride study? Yes, the salt, sodium, yeah. So what we found last winter is that there really was not any correlation between salt usage on the roads in Wyoming County and the areas where I did macroinvertebrate collections the following summer. However, last winter was a really mild winter compared to this winter. So I had the kids from Genesee Valley BOCES go out across Wyoming County and do these salt watch surveys in multiple points. They had not given me the data back yet, but they're using it as extra credit opportunity, so I should hopefully get a lot. So that's as far as I have right now. Last winter wasn't bad. We didn't find any impact to the macroinvertebrates where I had overlaid points. That's a great question. I really want to start sampling because it's 6-ppdq is the chemical that is leached from tires, and you find a lot of tires over top of manure piles holding tires down and all these rural properties. And this chemical, it's harmful to fish eggs and fish fry when they hatch out. So that's something with Fish and Wildlife we're actually talking about sampling for brook trout streams. Any other questions? Okay, well, thanks for listening to us.
Very good. Thank you for all you do for the chapter. I know it's appreciated. Thank you, Scott Cronett, for everything you do too.